This week, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership scored a major breakthrough after years-long negotiations among its 10 member states of ASEAN and 5 FTA partners. Despite India's withdrawal for now, the combined GDP of potential RCEP members will make it the world's largest free trade agreement when it's officially signed. What final touches will be added before the multilateral agreement is signed, potentially next year? And how will a trade bloc that encompasses a third of global GDP influence the international trading system and global value chains? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Charles Liu, founder of How Capital and to Anasia, associate editor of The Hindu. We'll also speak to Tan Ki Gia, co-director of the Asia Competitiveness Institute at National University of Singapore via satellite, and via Skype to Takasato Watanabe, professor emeritus from Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue. Charles and Atu, what are the major issues that have prevented parties concerned from reaching this agreement on RCEP over the past 7 years?
It's actually quite a complicated structure of negotiations. You're involving not only duties and non-tariff barriers and certificate of origin of goods, and the global framework in the last several years has also changed quite significantly. So just catching up with the changes on a global basis required a lot more negotiations. And India is in a particular situation. Participation in India, actually, of India has led to even further delays.
Atu, is it also true that most member states of RCEP have been wrestling with the idea about whether their participation in TPP should be prioritized, or they would rather take an early step in signing up RCEP? Do you think there's such a mental struggle?
I think there is a connection between the two, but after the U.S. decision to withdraw from the TPP, I think it became very clear that you have to shift to your plan B. And that plan B, as I understand, was RCEP. So the broader debate between TPP and RCEP finally was clinched in this because of the U.S. factor. So I clearly see a connection between the two.
Let me cross over to a Singaporean scholar, Mr. Tan, who's standing by in Shanghai. Hello, Mr. Tan. What do you think of the major obstacles that have prevented the major parties from reaching a quick agreement over the past 7 years? We are talking about issues in disputes between the major economies of this bloc.
Well, initially, Indonesia was reluctant to open up its market, although Indonesia would like to gain access to bigger markets outside ASEAN. And of course, this big hurdle has been overcome. And we have some issues with South Korea. But of course, the last major issue that we had was with India. And India was not very sure whether they want to get on with it, and because of the political domestic pressure. But I think it's not easy, but at least 15 countries had agreed to go ahead with or without India. India may still come back, but if India doesn't come back, next year it will be signed. And it will be significant because it's not easy. This RCEP has gone a long way. And this is the plan B we talk about, just like CPTPP. We have to go ahead without United States of America. And in this case, much as we would like India to be part of it, but if India should decide not to come in, and ASEAN 10+5 will still have to proceed. And I think this is crucial, especially that the global protectionism is getting ugly. And I think for those countries who like free trade, who like fair trade, and I think this is a significant achievement, both for ASEAN and the +5 countries, including China, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia.
But I'm wondering if our Japanese scholar, Mr. Takasato Watanabe, would agree with you that the current arrangement should be viewed as a major breakthrough because Japan, though disappointed with the absence of American leadership from TPP, might have been reluctant for quite a while before making up its mind to join or signing up RCEP. So, Professor Watanabe, what are your thoughts?
Japan is put into some difficulties politically and also economically because Mr. Abe's cabinet want to be close to the United States. However, economic circles of Japan, they want to be connected to the nearer countries, especially to Asian countries. Of course, America is very important, but at the same time, China, India, and other countries in Asia occupy more than half the population of the world. So economically, those areas is so important. This is a situation which is happening in the economic field and the political field, the gap of the two.
Professor Watanabe, let me ask you one more question concerning the role of ASEAN, because this 10-member regional bloc is said to be the next, the most successful bloc next to the European Union, although its success, quote-unquote, is not exactly based on the model of the European Union, which has been seriously undermined by issues concerning Brexit in the near future. What do you think of the prospects of ASEAN centrality, which has been viewed as the pillar that supports the dynamics of regional economic development, particularly ASEAN plus 3, Japan, South Korea, and China?
ASEAN plus 3, including China, of course, this is very important area economically and also politically. However, the China and Japan and Korea, these 3 major countries of economics of the world, this must be united. But to my a little regret, see, these 3 have different proposals to be united for the world. So next step, economically we should be united, and politically also we should try to the international peace, and we want to get the co-prosperity among Asian countries.
Okay, thank you very much, Watanabe, Professor Watanabe. Let's talk about India.
Yep.
That's the major economy that has generated a lot of media attention following the informal summit meeting on the sidelines of RCEP. Your country, your government has decided to withdraw for now from RCEP. Why?
Well, purely because of domestic considerations. The Indian economy right now is not in a great shape. The growth rate has come down to around 5%. There's a major problem in the automobile sector, which employs about 40% in the manufacturing side. The farmers have a problem with RCEP deal because, not so much because of China, but because of Australia and New Zealand, which are major producers of milk and wheat, etc., which will compete with Indian domestic products. So there is a stress in the farm, there is a stress in the factories, and along with that comes the political side of it. Most of the opposition parties have joined together. In fact, they have come as a unanimity against the Modi administration, against signing of the RCEP. Within the BJP or its parent organizations, there are trade unions objecting to it. So there is a severe domestic pressure right now on the Modi government to sign a deal. But having said that, I do think that there needs to be a via media which needs to be found out in negotiations, in addressing some of these concerns. If other countries are willing to go halfway, and India also has to move, not exactly from its current position, but show some more flexibility, I do think we can still get a deal through before 2020.
Other than the issue of domestic politics, Charles, so what do you think of the prospects of the Indian economy following the landslide, the campaign success of Prime Minister Modi for the second term?
The situation in India is actually quite complicated because, as Atul just mentioned, there are many different forces at play, and there isn't a cohesive strategic plan for its development. What we have is India has to build infrastructure. India has to modernize so many things. India has to address the pollution problems and the environmental issues, which has become known worldwide as now New Delhi is the dirtiest city in the world. So there are many, many issues that have to be addressed. And I think it's important for Indian leaders to not to take short-term based decisions and think longer term. Because if India is part of RCEP, it means participation in what is now the biggest market in the world, the biggest, bigger than the U.S. in terms of consumer market. Also participation in the most modern, sophisticated, and lowest cost supply chain in the world. If India can catch this ride, it would accelerate India's modernization and development quite significantly. And if they don't, then what we have is China, Japan, Korea, and ASEAN countries advancing further in building supply chain, value chain economics, which makes it more difficult for anybody else to catch up or to participate in the future.
Let me cross over to Ki Giap, the Singaporean scholar. Now,
Yes.
Singaporeans deserve credit for the consistency in the execution of their economic policies, perhaps from day one of its founding. Now, China also deserves credit very much for its 5-year planning, despite the process of decentralization from 40 years ago. Now, the issue we are discussing at this moment is why we are urging the Indian authorities to follow a long-term thinking pattern instead of adopting short-term political approaches in discussing the issue of regional integration, for example, RCEP.
Well, let me first talk about China. It is commendable for China to repeatedly assure, not only by your Premier Li Keqiang and also a few days ago, that China respects ASEAN's centrality in this economic integration and this part of RCEP. And therefore, I think that is a very important assurance that will make RCEP successful. Now, as for India, Modi's new government under BJP promised to create jobs and make it a manufacturing sector and give ASEAN a run for money as a factory of the world. And therefore, I think in the longer term, and I think it is very important for Indian politicians to get it right, that job creation, unemployment in India is getting very bad, and therefore manufacturing will be something that India can do as a low-cost center. And on that account, and I think it is very wise for Prime Minister Abe, logically, politically, and economically, they have to support RCEP, because you show the leadership in CPTPP when the USA is out. So logically, how can you not? And politically, how can Japan not support RCEP? And economically, we know Japan have problem with South Korea. But under the RCEP of 10+5, at least for now, I think there will be some potential opportunity for South Korea and Japan to work within RCEP. I think this is all plus for Japan. And of course, ASEAN, we're very successful. As you rightly pointed out, it's not based on the same model as European Union. But I think ASEAN recognized, especially after the US-China trade friction, and ASEAN is a viable manufacturing center, maybe middle tech and low cost. So again, this is a complementary to China because of the 25% tariffs making many multinationals working in China become unprofitable. So I think in that sense, if China can work with ASEAN closely, and with this market with Japan and South Korea, and hopefully India will come in, and we will show to the rest of the world, Asia can be really proactive. Not only we make globalization work, and we're going to make it inclusive as well, that it is not going to lead to income disparity, but rather efforts to make sure the fruits of globalization are enjoyed by the public at large. I think in this sense, government had to do a little bit more, especially when it comes to digital economies.
Thank you very much, Ki Gyap from Singapore. Now, Professor Watanabe, Ki Gyap was one small step short of answering my question directly on the short-term political decision of Indian politicians regarding withdrawal for now by India from RCEP. Now, Japan is also a competitive democracy, and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is the longest-serving Prime Minister in the post-war era. What do you think of, say, the political wisdom of Mr. Abe in being part of RCEP instead of pleasing short-term domestic politics? Although, at the same time, we have to admit that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is not facing any arch political rival at home. Is that true?
Frankly speaking, Mr. Abe is put into difficulties in management of the Japanese politics because Mr. Trump of the United States, he is doing everything he wants to do for the next election. So Mr. Abe and his cabinet members are put into difficulty to follow the United States for 100%. Actually, as I said before, economic circles want to be with neighboring countries, including, say, China, Korea, and also another big country, India, and other Asian countries. So by and by, I think and I believe that Mr. Abe's political activities and economic circles benefit of the Japanese business people, they will be getting near and near. I mean that the central policies of economy and politics will be centered on the Asian nations, Asian territorial benefits.
Professor Watanabe, let me ask you one more question concerning the prospects of e-commerce, because I just came back from the second international conference on China's import expo. One of the parallel discussions there focused on e-commerce. To my knowledge, the Japanese government encourages more online payment to catch up with the dynamics of e-commerce in China, for example. What do you think of the vibrancy in this policy option? What do you think of, say, the prospect that Japan will catch up very quickly?
Yes. As I said before, even the e-commerce is changing into Asian nations because the SoftBank Group made a very big deficit yesterday, and so gradually all the people and all the groups of the economy of Japan would be going to the Asian countries.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. E-commerce, big data, artificial intelligence have become catchphrases in our daily vocabulary about the competitiveness in Asia. Do you think the use of digital technology will help close gap between rich and poor and also promote the general competitive edge of Asian economies? And in this particular area, do you think China assumes the leadership? And that has caused consternation from the United States.
There's absolutely no question that China is way ahead of the U.S. in terms of e-commerce and mobile payments. Take mobile payment, for example. Last year, mobile payment in dollar amounts, in dollar terms, China was 50 times that of the U.S. They're still writing checks in the U.S. So the technology is really prevalent now throughout Asia. It's not just China, but also in India and also Southeast Asia. Now, this is, of course, when you capture transactions, you capture data. So then you have massive big data, and you have artificial intelligence.
And then you have no absolute privacy.
Well, you know, one worries about that, but at the same time, there are those who think that if I don't do anything illegal or bad, you know, there's less of issue of privacy. I think fintech, financial technology, there is absolutely no question that China will take the lead. In fact, within the next couple months, we should be hearing the announcement of digital currency, digital renminbi, to be launched officially. It will be the first central bank-sponsored digital currency, which has much significance worldwide. Now, the key to this, in terms of e-commerce, mobile payment, and fintech, is a question of efficiency enhancement. It doesn't really address the issue of the gap between the rich and the poor, but it makes transactions, trading, makes many things more efficient and trackable.
That's exactly the next question I'm going to ask too, concerning high efficiency in cross-border payment. The use of Libra is said to be able to level the playing field between developed countries and those in sub-Saharan region, for example, where the impoverished population can hardly have equal access to fintech or banking institutions. And therefore, Zuckerberg came up with the idea of Libra, but China, of course, doesn't take side immediately. Although our central bank says we'll soon issue, or we are proactively considering the use of a digital currency to, as Charles said wisely, reduce the transaction costs. Do you think the use of Alipay and the WeChat payment, the online payment, will help Asia assume leadership and in further integrating the regional economy?
Well, I do believe that fintech is vital, and digital payments like WeChat, Alipay. In India, we have something called Paytm, which is not as big as Alipay or WeChat, but it is something which we do digital payments. Coming back to Libra, I don't think Libra is governed by the central bank of the United States. It's an initiative which has been taken by Facebook, by Zuckerberg. So I don't know how that fits into, that's a separate category which has its own sort of a fallout which needs to be analyzed and addressed. But as far as the use of digital technology goes, and linked with that e-commerce, that not only promotes efficiency, but with efficiency comes a downstream effect of making running factories more efficiently and the entire supply chain more efficiently, which generates jobs. So it's great for the economy to have more of digitalization. I want to come back to one point about India in an earlier question. You see, India's concern regarding RCEP is on 3 counts. One is labor and services mobility. That's one sticking point. Second thing is an anti-dumping trigger mechanism, because the fear that Chinese goods will come into India. So there is a suggestion of a trigger mechanism which will prevent it coming, which will destabilize the Indian economy. And third is the country of origin. So we can narrow it down, the differences on these 3 points. I think it's important that other partner countries understand these concerns of India and go ahead and negotiate in good faith, because while India will lose out big time by not joining RCEP, I think the rest of the member countries will also lose out big time by not having India on board, a market of 1.4 billion people and talent which will get into software for AI and others and become part of a much larger Asian supply chain. I also think there's a geopolitical element into it. The rise of Asia cannot be possible without the rise of entire Asia, of which China, India, Japan, Korea will be the pillars, and ASEAN.
Key gap. Let me ask you.
Yes.
What's going to happen to a summit to be hosted by China between ROK, Japan, and the PRC concerning FTA in the near future? Because FTA, RCEP, the regional integration, and the WTO are said to be the 2 wheels of World Trade Body. But given the current rivalry, which is escalating between Seoul and Tokyo on territory and the issue of history, do you think the future of having such a summit will proceed as scheduled?
Okay, before I answer to that question, can I respond to the Indian speakers that on one hand, if in India you want your mobility of your labor professionals, then you must also open up your manufacturing sector. You can't have one and do not want the other one. Now, as far as ASEAN is concerned, Singapore is willing to provide e-commerce capacity building in this digital economy as a public good. Now, as for your questions, I think we should look at it this way. CPTPP and RCEP, they are pathway to FTA-AP. I think President Xi Jinping announced FTA-AP in 2013. So if these two move parallel, they are not contradictory. Of course, if they can move towards FTA-AP, and if we do that, that will be great. And if we move towards FTA-AP, I think United States of America would have no choice but to come in, because otherwise they are going to lose out tremendously. So I think it's excellent now. By early next year, RCEP can be signed. CPTPP is already signed. So they move parallel and lead to FTA-AP, and I think that will be good for the rest of the world. And I think that's why I'm saying that next year, early next year, will be a very important milestone. That while CPTPP is moving parallel to RCEP, and India, United States of America, they have to think very hard whether they want to be part of this FTA-AP eventually. I think this is better than multilateral, because under WTO is so difficult. But FTA-AP, it is the growth engine of the world. And therefore, I think I'm optimistic
Thank you very much.
that RCEP and CPTPP are the right pathway leading to FTA-AP.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Tan Ki-Giap. Very quickly, before we wrap up this discussion in 2 minutes, Charles, what do you think of the prospects of a regional agreement, the Phase 1 agreement on trade disputes between the United States and China? Do you think the breakthrough of RCEP will somehow influence decision makers in the DC about reaching a ceasefire
President
between
Trump,
China and the United States?
Vice President Pence neither attended the meeting and sent Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce. I think Washington is more concerned about the politics of Washington today, including impeachment and Ukraine Gate and so on, to really think too much about the strategic issues for Asia Pacific.
And what do you think of the impact of disengaging from RCEP or TPP by the United States?
Well, RCEP, the United States is already disengaged, so that is a given. As regards the trade issues, I think between China and the United States, there is a ceasefire right now, and it will remain so because of the elections coming up next year. But once you have the elections through, then I think the fundamental contradictions will come into play. But right now, it seems to be that it's in the interest of the Trump administration, and of course in China's interest, to come to a pause in this escalating trade war.
They will be, I guess, retracting of a number of things, like some of the tariffs will be withdrawn and so on, and China will buy.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much, Charles, and of course, Mr. Tan Ki-Giap. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.